Thank you for coming to the Rock here in Pinetown, South Africa. It's lovely to see the faces. It's lovely to see Latasha back again. Yes. Yeah, she's been away for so long now. I mean, I thought she'd run away, you know. But I know I shouldn't think things like this, but she's always away for 9 months. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything. I'm done. I'm done. I hope for those folk who are here for the first time, and we welcome this morning Frida this morning, and thank you, Gail, for coming back, and anybody else who has heard me. Thank you all. God bless you all. This morning, I want to speak about the actual statue of Nebuchadnezzar, because it's always been something. It's always been a priority. It's always been. People, we go through, you often hear Daniel is connected with the book of Revelation, and therefore end times is connected together. The angel Gabriel told Daniel, he said, look, these are the things that are going to happen at the end. He told him so much, but then there's so much that we didn't hear because it was written down. And then he said, now seal this up until the end, because it's going to be towards the very end. In other words, it's going to be towards like now. And this is what he did. He sealed it up, and lo and behold, we've got to figure out a few things. But there are a few things that Daniel actually did tell us. So from that, we can work out a certain amount until we come to the very end. And when we come to the very end, I have heard so much speculation at the very end of it's a statue when it comes to the feet, and the Bible says that the feet is mixed with clay and is mixed with iron. And I've heard a lot of stories about that, and how it can be, and there are a lot of stories, and I'm not saying mine's right. All I'm saying is that it'll just give us room for a little bit more thought. That's all I'm saying. So it's great to be here this morning, and it's great to have actually eventually got here this morning. And some people who do not come to this church, but who do know us. And I got moaned at during the week because apparently I didn't send out the red heifer video to everybody. Now, I usually don't send it to people who are on our rock group or our prayer group. And now we've set up a new group, but it'll go out no matter about that group. And then all of a sudden I got this. I've been looking forward to this red heifer, and it's nearly Passover. By the way, Passover starts tomorrow night, and there's nothing. So I was able to send it to this young lady, and it was very good. All right, so Babylonia. You can see here that Babylonia was a major empire at the time. You can see how it stretches all the way across here from Babylon, right the way through, all the way down. This is the route, Aleppo, which is in Syria, and it comes all the way down to Tyre in Sidon, then Megiddo, which is the Valley of Megiddo, which is Armageddon, by the way. Incidentally, I don't know if you knew, but the battle isn't going to be in Armageddon. It's going to be in Jerusalem. The Bible just tells us that the armies will gather together at Armageddon. Then we get Samaria. Today they call that the West Bank. And then we come to the place Gaza, which is having a bit of a rough time at the moment. And Judah. It's not called Judah anymore. It's also called the West Bank. So you've got Judah and you've got Samaria, and they're both now called the West Bank. As we go further, we will come right the way down, and this will take us into the Red Sea. And this is where Moses crossed the Red Sea. He came right across there, and they wandered around for 40 years in the Arabian desert. And eventually, when they came to the mountain of Horeb, Mount Horeb, or Mount Sinai, as it changes its name. And then God gave them the commandments and the written law. And that was the first. They were able to break that pretty soon. And the way it works with the Jewish people or with Judaism was, if you do good, you get good. If you do bad, you get bad. If you do good, you'll be all right. But land was not up for sale. Why? Because the land belongs to God. They don't give land away. And since 1947, 48. They've been giving lots of land away, and it's never, ever, ever ever going to work. That's why a two-state system is never going to work. The only time there was peace from reaching from Gaza right the way across to the Jordan River was when King Solomon ruled. Only time. After that, it wasn't good. Anyway, let me just carry on this morning and talk to you about stretching down to Babylonian, right down to southern Iraq. That's amazing, and that's where it is. And Nebuchadnezzar, he ruled from about 605 until about 562 years before Christ. So it's a good 600 years before Nebuchadnezzar would have met Christ, but he did meet Daniel, because when the Babylonians went to conquer, and they conquered into Judah, and they conquered into Samaria, and they took them away, but they took them away in 3 phases. They took the young ones first, so I would have been gone earlier. They took the young ones first, and then they took the second, and then the third. Now, Daniel was amongst the first young ones who was rich. He was royal. He was of stature, and they took those guys first, and then they took Ezekiel was in the second one. Jeremiah the prophet, they left him behind, and he was there being left behind because he had to minister. Somebody has to minister at the end to the people who are in Jerusalem. Things never really went well. Daniel was taken away. Another guy called Hananiah was taken away. A guy called Mishael was taken away. And a guy called Azariah was taken away. And we will know them better by their Babylonian names: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And those were the guys that came along. Now, when Nebuchadnezzar, now remember, it wasn't Daniel who had the dream, it was Nebuchadnezzar. And in those days, they right out in the east, they believed a lot in sorcery. They believed a lot in the stars. And you know, if you ever bought a newspaper, you see the star sign. It used to be very popular. Newspapers aren't very popular anymore. But you used to have, and people would go straight to the star sign. What is my star for the day? What's going to happen to me today? And people used to read those. And it comes all the way back from there when you wanted to know what is going to happen today. Well, the thing is, you've just got to live through the day, because whatever happens today is gone tomorrow, and then there's something else the next day. So we find that Daniel then, after conquering all of this here, or not Daniel, the Babylonians, after conquering the whole thing, then what he did was, they sat down and they waited for their enemies. Now, it stretched right across to a place called Elam. I'm not sure if it's on the map. We've got Babylonia, and here we've got Nineveh. Remember Jonah? He was conquered. They were conquered there. This here is Elam, and this is Iran. So you see, it had a huge place to rule over. And it was quite amazing to when I was studying it and to see just how much they had. So Nebuchadnezzar was a wise old boy, and he said, "Look," he says, "here's the situation. What I want to do is, first of all," which wasn't wise, he destroyed the temple, the Solomon's temple, the first temple that was made. He destroyed that. They looted it. They took all the cups and the I was going to say saucers, but they took all the cups and all the instruments and everything that they had. They took them away, and these were sanctified things. These were things that were made holy, and they started to use them just for partying and drinking, and it doesn't matter. It's just a cup; it'll hold a glass of wine and that sort of thing. And so they started to do that, but he had this vision, and the dream was this huge statue. And then he called all his wise men in, and he said to the wise men, "Can you tell me what my dream was?" And they sat down, and I thought, well, we can try, we can give it a shot. And he said, "No, don't give it a shot." He said, "I want you to tell me what it was, what the interpretation is." And they said to Nebuchadnezzar, the king, they said to him, "Well, if you tell us what your dream was, we will interpret it." And he said, no. He says, I don't want you to interpret my dream. I want you to tell me my dream. Then I want you to interpret it, which I thought was pretty clever. Now you've got to know what the dream was. Then you've got to know the interpretation of it. And he said, and if any of you guys don't do it, you're dead. I'm going to kill you all. So they were fairly worried. They had a lot of things on their mind. And they probably were thinking of Boney M at the time, by the rivers of Babylon where we sat down. But anyway, they were there, and all of a sudden, Daniel came forward and he said, I'll be able to do it if I need a few days. So Daniel called his 3 friends, and he said, right, what we've got to do is we've got to get to the statue. We've got to ask God to show us what the dream was. And then when we see the dream, we will then ask God for his interpretation, because it's no good man's interpretation. We will ask for God's interpretation of it. And there we have the God's interpretation. Now I'm going to change. And that was the statue. Right, so it's quite an impressive one. It was 90 meters high and about 30 meters wide, and it was really, really was high. And they had this planted, and everybody who came out every day had to bow down before it and worship it. It was a false god. It was a false idol, but it was an egotistical one for Nebuchadnezzar. It was his ego. And some people didn't bow down to it, and the people who didn't bow down to it, of course, was Daniel. And he would open his windows and he would pray. And what they did in those days, interesting enough, is, today when the Muslims face Mecca to pray, well, that wasn't the original idea, because Muslims came 600 years after Christ. The original idea was to open the windows and pray towards Jerusalem. And that's what the people of God did, the Hebrew people. They opened it and prayed there. But there's a couple of guys that didn't want to do this, and of course it was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and so they were caught, and they were going to be put into a fiery furnace. And as they got caught, they were tied, and as they got put into a fiery furnace, the soldiers who were actually, I would imagine, using long prods to prod, because it would be very, very, very hot, prodding them into this fiery furnace. The heat sucked them in and killed them. And there was little window slots, and Nebuchadnezzar looked and he says, how many people did we put in there? And they said, well, we put 3 in. He said, well, I see 4 people walking about. How can that be? And the 4th person, of course, was Jesus Christ. He was walking around, and when they let them out, there was 3 came out. And they hadn't been burned, they hadn't been scathed, nothing had happened to them, and they were given quite an amazing gift that they were given because of the whole thing. But we're going to look at the head. First of all, the head, as you can see, the head is made of gold. That's supposed to be gold. So the head is. Let me turn this side. The head is gold. Okay, and then you notice he's got arms and very good biceps, which obviously reminds you guys of me. But he had gold, and he had biceps, and these biceps and the waist was made of silver. Okay, and then on down to the waist, it was made of copper. And then we have the 2 legs, and the legs were made of iron, and the feet themselves, they were made of a mixture of iron and clay. And everybody that I know says iron and clay does not mix. And that's because they are looking at a statue made by man, and that's why. And because of that, they are getting mixed up with the iron and the clay. And what really does it mean? And it says in the Bible. Well, the people have said it's 10 toes, so it's going to be smashed. Now, the Bible tells us in the book of Daniel that yes, it is smashed. Eventually, this is the end times. This is where we are. You can actually maybe have a look around and see where you're going to live. But this was the very end, and it says it'll be destroyed, but it'll be destroyed with a rock, but a rock that was not hewn or cut out by human hand. In other words, it's going to be destroyed by God himself. Jesus Christ will destroy this this whole thing. And once he destroys the feet, then the legs go and everything goes, and the whole thing buckles under, and away he goes. Then there are no more temples. And then it says, then that kingdom that is then comes out of that, out of those ashes, will be a kingdom that will be forever and ever and ever, and that is the kingdom of God. All right, so now that's the background to the story, and pretty much what's going to happen. We do hear of something similar in the book of Revelation when they talk about 10 horns, and people tie up the 10 horns and the 10 toes, and what are the difference, and are they the same thing? And to be honest with you, it's something that is, well, we'll get into that now. I'll tell you now. Not that I haven't forgotten it. I do remember. I do remember it. So we've got all of this stuff. Now, if we go to Daniel 2 and verse 31, and here we see that the words were still on his lips when a voice came from heaven. This is what is decreed for you. This was Daniel. King Nebuchadnezzar, your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass and cattle. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all of the kingdoms, the Most High sovereign over them all of men, and gives them to anyone he wishes. Immediately, what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was filled with and driven. Fear was in the people, and they did. The Nebuchadnezzar, it is recorded, where he actually started to eat the grass, and it looked like he had gone insane until he recognized that the God in the heavens was the only God, and he lifted his arms up and he praised God, and God restored his sanity. His son, however, was called Belshazzar, and his son, he would like to throw parties, and they would go into their castles and they would have a lot of parties, and all of the temple utensils would come out, and they would have little cookies that Steph makes, and things like that, and they bring out the wine and stuff like that. I'm not looking at anybody when I say wine. We brings out the wine and stuff like that, and they would drink and they would eat, and then all of a sudden a huge hand appeared and wrote something on the wall, but it was something that they couldn't read. So they said, "Is there anybody here that can read that's written?" And nobody said a word. And he says, "I'll tell you what, whoever can do it, I will give a purple robe, and they will be second in command. They will rule over this whole place." And when they looked around, Daniel came forward and he says, "Look, I'm going to tell you what it means, but I don't want any of your gifts, because what I'm going to tell you is not the greatest thing you want to hear." And he said, "Well, tell us what it is." And Daniel says, "Well," he says, tonight, you're going to be conquered by another country called the Medes and Persians. Persians today is Iran, okay? The Medes are still there, but they're smaller. They were a smaller nation. Then you had the Persians. It's going to be overtaken, and you, my friend Belshazzar, you are going to die. So he thought, "Oh, anyway, give him a robe and give him what we said we'd give him." And that very night, he was actually killed. And overnight, literally overnight, we had this victory from the Medes and the Persians. So the gold, which was beautiful, was actually no longer any good. The gold was no good. Now we get the Medes and the Persians, and here they are, and they reigned from 539 to 331 before Christ, and that's what the statue represents there of that in a dream and the way he built it. And the Medes and the Persians, they ruled for quite a while. But eventually they were overtaken as well, as all empires are. They get taken over into different regions and into different areas. And he goes on to explain the two legs. The two legs are made of iron. This iron represents the Romans were very good. Look, let's say the Greeks were very good at culture. They were very good at at languages. They were very good at philosophy. They were very good at educating the people. But here we come down now to these legs now. These legs belong to the Roman Empire, which symbolize the Roman Empire, because they crushed everything. They were strong. They took no nonsense. These guys were the ones that marched all over the place. And they decided they would build straight roads everywhere they went, because the straighter the road, the quicker it is to get there. It makes sense. They had good ideas. Some of their lacking ideas was the Greeks had a Greek mythology, and they had Greek gods, and they had all sorts of things. Well, what the Romans did, instead of creating their own stuff, Greek gods and Greek and mythology, what they took was they took all the Greek stuff and then they put it and renamed it and named it after theirs. That's why we get today, we get the sun god, we get Tuesday, we get Thursday after the Thor god. So all of this was happening at the same time. Anyway, but now there's two legs. So what happened? Well, there was a split. And the split came in just after Constantine in 325. The split came because the Roman Empire was so big that they couldn't rule it from Rome. So Constantine, he ruled it from a place called Constantinople. Now, most people will know that Constantinople is not Constantinople anymore. It's called Istanbul. And he said, and that's up in Turkey, he said he will rule his army from there. But what he did was to get the people into the army and to make the army bigger, he included a lot of the pagan stuff that was already in existence to bring in the pagans into this army, because Constantine, he decided he would make it more or less a Christian army with a cross. He had a vision in the sky, and his mother, Helena, she went to Jerusalem. This was 300 years after the death of Christ, and she thought she discovered three crosses, one for Jesus, one for the bad guy, and one for the guy who was going to join Jesus in paradise. Okay, that's what she thought. So what happened was this split occurred, and here we have now, the army is now split, and it's being divided by two rulers, which will never work. So here we have Constantine, who's ruling it from Constantinople, and then we have on the other side, we have got another Roman general who ruling it from Rome, and they were always at loggerheads, but they were still ruling together. They were still an empire. The legs of iron, Rome was 168 years before Christ, and 476 AD. AD means after Christ. BC means before Christ. AD is after Christ. So it ruled from 168 before Christ to 476 AD. That was nearly 600 years, and that was a long time. That's why you had Jesus and all the disciples and everybody around, all running and paying taxes and giving everything that they could to these Roman guys, because they were ruling the place. And then we come to this lot, and this which I downloaded from the internet eventually last night. I thought I might have to go to Rome for it, but I didn't. It's a feat of iron and clay. This guy who wrote this has got its Papal Rome and the modern nations of Europe. Papal Rome. Now, I've thought about this all week, and I've asked people questions. What do they think about who is the final empire? Who's it going to be? Because it's going to be ruined. It's going to be rocked. It's going to be knocked down by Jesus Christ. The rock, remember, the rock that has not been hewn, the rock that has not been cut out of stone. It's going to happen one day. And who are these people? And the Bible talks about it, and the Bible says the feet are made of clay and iron. They don't mix. So I've thought about it for a long time, over many years, and I thought, well, it would be maybe the Muslims sharing it with the Gentiles, then they wouldn't get on together. It could be this one, it could be that one. And people have had so many different ideas on who this final empire could be. And the final empire is going to be worse than the first one. It's going to be worse than the second one. It's going to be worse than all of them. But it's going to be destroyed. It's going to be destroyed by Jesus. So we're looking now at the final empire. We're looking at the one that's ruling when Christ returns onto this earth. He is going to smash it to pieces. Remember in Zechariah 14, when it says his feet will touch the Mount of Olives, and that's when the war is, and that's when he's going to do everything is going to happen. And that's when that empire is going to be destroyed. But there is going to be a peace treaty, and the peace treaty that's going to be made will be happy, because at the moment, but let's be honest, look at the wars around us. Look at the wars in the Ukraine and up in Russia. We look at the one that's central, though, and the central one, and God always looks at Israel as the central place to look at. And we look at that and we see how Gaza is going, not so great. We see that they're being shot at from the Yemen, which is also the Middle East. They're being shot at from Syria, the Middle East. They're being shot at now from Syria, Damascus. They're being shot at from Iran. Interesting enough, what's happening now is there will be a peace, or a cinnamon peace, a peace where people will accept it, because you can't be in a war like the way they've been in a war for so many months at the moment, and it could go into years, and then all of a sudden somebody comes up with a peace plan. I've got a peace plan for you. You would grab it with both hands. And that is how the Antichrist is going to get into the final empire. But who is this Antichrist, and who is the final empire? The final empire, I believe, is that the 10 or the feet of clay, I believe, is going to be the mixture of the various organizations that are represented throughout the world today. People who we think are credible. People like the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, who lend money out. And of course, once you lend money out, he who pays the piper calls the tune. The IMF, the United Nations, I believe, will be part of it. The WHO, the World Health Organization, is coming up this year, and they want to take all the power for your health away from you. They want to take all the power away from your doctor, from your hospital. They want to take all the power of your health away from your hospitals, from your health departments, and they will make a decision. Now, each of these guys in the WHO are not elected. Okay, they're just voted in, but they're not elected in by the people. They are there, and it doesn't mean to say that they are professionals. I mean, look at the disaster we had with the pandemic that we've just come through. So WHO is going to be on that health side. On the United Nations, you're going to get the countries. We've got the IMF, who's going to have the monetary fund. We're going to have a thing called the European Bank, which is also is a big player in Europe, because if you notice, Europe is getting away. You may hear more and more about BRICS. BRICS is the countries that have joined. It's Brazil, it's Russia, India, and China, and they want to put up their own currency as well. Then you've got NATO. Now, NATO's the fighting force. So you've got the health force, you've got the monetary force, and you've got the health force of NATO. And that's going to be the military power coming through, because they don't want any one country to have that power. No one country must have it. Because if one country has it, we'll end up with this whole thing again. We'll end up with all these different empires. So they want to have it all divided and mixed out the way that they want to have it done. Now they have we have a thing called the European Monetary Integration, and this came after the Treaty of Rome, 10 years after a thing called the Treaty of Rome. And it was there to protect the weaker countries. Now we're coming to something that now starts to make sense, because now we know that the iron is strong and we know that the clay is weak and brittle. And now we're getting something that has been brought in that's going to help the weaker countries to be stronger, not strong as they are, but stronger. We have the economic monetary system, and that's already been brought in. It's called the euro. You've heard of that. Then we have the European sovereign debt. I can't read that. Anyway, the European Sovereign Debt Organization, and they will then decide which country can devalue and which country can't. You can devalue because you've got a lot of money. You can't devalue because you don't have a lot of money. You're strong, you're weak. You can do it, you can't. And we find the strength and the weakness in this whole system. I'll give you a few examples. Some of the weak countries for finances which cannot devalue the euro is Greece, Ireland, Spain, Portugal, Cyprus. And we will find that all of these countries are dependent on the IMF. They're all dependent on the stronger countries, but they will not be able to stick together. There will always be fighting, and there will always be debt. And where you've got debt in the world and in the countries, there's going to be a big problem. And that's what I see. I see the head being Babylon. I see the Medo-Persian being here. I see the Greeks being here. We see the legs of the iron, and we're split into two nations. And then from them we get the toes. Now people say the 10 toes. It doesn't mention 10 toes. It just talks about the feet of clay. All right. So it's the feet of clay. Why feet? Because that's what it'll be standing on. So once that's right, once the economic power, the military power, the world health power takes over, and you have got you and me, we'll have no say. We will not, if the WHO say, look, there's a pandemic coming out next week at about 2:30, you can be sure that there will be a pandemic coming out next week at 2:30, and this is what you've got to buy. These are the medications that you'll have to buy. And it's the medications company, which is the big pharma, and in the Greek it's called pharmakeia. It's mentioned in the book of Revelation. And I remember the first time I mentioned this, YouTube took me off it. But it's pharmakeia. It's a simple word, and it means pharmacy. It means those. And those are the guys who the WHO will have control over. And because they will have control over the world, they're going to have control over you. They will be able to tell you what to do and what to say. And then if your country runs out of money, like many countries have run out of money, they go there cap in hand to the IMF. IMF will say, we'll give you the money only if you can take this, only if you can do that, only if you can buy that, only if you can jump through that particular hoop. So this investigation, the monetary investigation, came from the Treaty of Rome. And this Treaty of Rome was very popular back in the 60s. We often heard about that. And it was to protect the weaker countries. So now what I'm saying, and I'm wrapping it up now, what I'm saying is that the empires were strong in themselves. But each empire had a stronger empire, although they were weaker in their moral values. You had the gold, which is is much more valuable than silver. Silver is more valuable than the copper. Copper is more valuable than the iron. And the iron and the clay mixed together is worth nothing at all. But the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, Jesus, will come, and he is going to crush. The Bible says he's going to crush those feet, and everything will fall down. And I'm talking about the system. I'm not just talking about this one statue behind me. The whole system will fall down, and Jesus himself will take over. He will be the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and he will be the one who will make the decisions in the future for us. And we will have 1,000 years reign of peace and glory, and we thank God for that. Amen. Sorry? Close the service with a prayer. Do you want to close the prayers just now? Right. We're not going to sing. We're not going to sing anything. Huh? Just going to close in prayer. Yeah. Okay. We're going to close.